Welcome, wonderful souls, to All Things Funny Chat with me, Naomi Girl. And today it's a guest. We have got Emma with us today, which is All Thing Turning 30 coach. I found Emma via Instagram. I've been following her for a while. I loved her journey, and she shared a reel recently, and I jumped on the chance to ask her to come on and chat with us today. You can find Emma on Instagram, but I'm sure she'll share where else you can find her. But I love following Emma because I'm also a fellow 30 something. And so I love Emma's approach to all things being 30 because it is a taboo in this country for sure on so many levels. So, Emma, please introduce yourself. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I jumped at the chance of being on the A Funny Chat podcast. Absolutely love the name of this podcast. And yeah, I just love talking all things funny. So really excited to be here. As you beautifully introduced, I'm the Turning 30 coach. So I'm a life coach that really focuses on helping women who are about to be in their 30s or already in their 30s who feel left behind. They feel like they're not doing life right in some way. They feel as though everyone else around them is hitting the milestones and doing all of the things, and they just feel like they aren't doing it and they feel like they're failing and something is wrong. And that's why I step in to help people realize that they're not doing anything wrong. It's basically bullshit from society that has come to signal us that we're doing something wrong when really we're all just on our own paths. And yeah, I work with women in one-on-one, in groups, to look at things differently. And specifically at the moment, I'm really focused on a mission of helping women who are in their 30s and who feel like their careers aren't where they want them to
Mm,
be,
mm.
to find freedom in their career and to set up their own things, at side hustles, businesses, become self-employed. So yeah, that's me.
Emma, thank you so much. I love that that is your focus. I saw that you've got a program coming up, and I love that's your focus because a lot of people who come into my space, they suddenly realize that they want more for themselves, and that generally comes from career life, right? And it doesn't matter where they are on their journey with everything else. It sort of always sort of circles back to the career because that's where our joy and pleasure comes from day to day, is the work that we're doing and the output that we're doing, right? And so some of us are in a position of, oh, but I'm in my 30s. Can I? Can I? Can
Mm.
I just leave this career that I've done since I was like 21? It's the can I, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that weird fake thing that we're signaled in our very early 20s that by the time you're 30, you will definitely know what you want to do. You would have had it all figured out. You're going to have loads in your savings account. You're going to be like buying a house, probably with your partner, and you maybe have some kids on the way. And it does go back to career. Like, people are signaled from a young age that they're going to have it figured out by 30. And therefore, when you're 30 plus and you're like, I hate my job, or I'm just not feeling fulfilled, I'm not aligned, you then start to have these fake beliefs, which are, I cannot leave, because if I leave at this age, then it means that I'm doing something wrong. And it's just, obviously it's not true, and we know that. So yeah, it's just a huge passion of mine to help people know that at any age, really. I brand myself as the turning 30 coach, but 40, 50, 60, 70, go and do what you want to do. We have one life. Go and work in what you want to work in.
Thank you so much for sharing that message, Emma. I'm so grateful to you being here and sharing all of the wisdom that comes from, these years as we leave the 20s and then we enter into that year of 30. I don't know if anyone's listening to this and they're like 29. It feels big, right? The 29 to the
It's a crisis. We go. The reason I chose to work with this age group was a lot because I felt there was a huge need for it, but also because I had my own turning 30 crisis that started on my 29th birthday, when I was all of a sudden like, oh shit, in 1 year, I'm going to be 30. And when did this happen? So totally, it's really is a turning 30 crisis that, by the way, is very specific to women. Men, I think, have it later on in their 30s, more around 40, I would say. Some men have it around 30 for career stuff and more around money, but in general, it's very individualized to women, because of this pressure of also the decade that you're going to probably bring a child into the world if you want to become a mother, or that you should want to do it at this age. And yeah, women are definitely penalized more for aging than men.
Mm. That's so interesting because they talk about the midlife crisis, right? Society talks about the midlife crisis that apparently everyone hits, but I always think of that for men. I'm like, oh, the midlife crisis for men. Could you think of them buying like, isn't it societal like so ridiculous? It's like, oh, they bought that car midlife in it,
So true.
right?
And women have the same crisis at 30, I'm telling you.
Okay. So interesting. Yeah, I did feel the energy shift hugely. But interestingly, I turned 30 with children, right? So I have children. I bought a house. I have a husband. I still felt it. I still felt it. But for so many other reasons. Do you know what I mean? Because, yeah,
I would love to hear
yeah.
what your reasons were that you still felt it,
Okay.
because you did kind of tick off those classic check boxes that you had all the things.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a really, I want to hear you say it first, and then I'll analyze it. But I think
Okay.
it's really important because, there's different categories of 30 somethings, the ones who do have all of the things and the ones that didn't get the things that they wanted. And we can often think that the grass is greener on the other side. So it's important to hear the other side of the story. So go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when I got to that point, I was like, I haven't lived my life enough. I was like, now I'm a mother and I'm like on the daily grind, the school run for however many years. I haven't traveled. I haven't explored my career enough. I want to change my career completely. That feels challenging. My husband, have I explored enough penis? I don't know. Have I? Probably not. Haven't dated properly, really, in the great scheme of things. It was all those thoughts. And now I'm 30. And so if shit hits the fan with my husband, for example, I'm 30. Do you know what I mean? And those were the thoughts that went round. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I always say so. I have, like I said, the client who, most of the clients I work with are in this category. They've in their 20s, they've gone on their own path, they've not necessarily done their own thing, but life has just happened and twists and turns of 20s. And then it happens to be that they turn 29, 30, 31, and they're like, oh shit, like I don't have the job I want. I've not met someone. I don't have a property, all those things. And then they panic. And then there's the other category, which is maybe something that you fall into more, which is like, oh, they did do all the things, but they still feel like, is this it?
Mm-hmm.
And I work with a lot of women also who have children who question themselves. And it's almost like the questions happened after they did all the things.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just really, it's evidence that we all have human brains, and our human brains are literally, no matter what the circumstance, is going to tell us something negative. It's just
Mm-hmm.
the truth of what it is. It does not matter whether you hit those check boxes or not. Our happiness does not come from the husband, the kids, all the milestones, the engagements, or things like this. It just doesn't. It might temporarily give us happiness, but our overall enjoyment as human beings comes from our thoughts, not from our circumstances.
100%. And that is what triggered me into this work more and more and more because I realized that on paper, on paper, I had it all. And then I was like, wait, none of this is bringing me happiness. My relationship with my husband doesn't bring me that much happiness because I'm putting so much on that relationship. And my children, I went on such a long journey to have my children. So I should be happy, right? I had to go on a fertility journey. So I should be so bloody grateful, And so it's all of those. And then I went, there's something still missing. There's something huge. Oh, wait, it's because I'm not happy from within. And everyone goes, oh, that's so cliched. But truly, deeply, I'm not saying, and I always say this, we can't be like, okay, now I fully love myself. Okay. Like, that's not it. But I'm saying that I needed to come back to myself and find my identity, who I was, because I'd lost it as a result of being a wife, being a mother, and also being a slave to the career that I had before, not really ever being able to let it go. So I was like, I need to do this work. Obviously, start
Yeah.
working with the vagina. But I do love the fact that I've got a British person on the podcast, Emma, because you said you love fanny chat. Well,
Mhm.
I've had 3 American people on before that, and we've discussed fanny, right? Because obviously
Mhm.
fanny means ass in America.
I know. I heard it on one of your podcast episodes and I was
Right.
like, what?
Yeah.
What? Why?
Yeah, so I'm really glad that you're like on board with the fanny. Not that they weren't on board, they were like, it's very British. But then sometimes I feel like I'm too British. So I'm really grateful that we can discuss fanny
Oh no,
today.
I'm a huge fan of anything British and British slang. Bring me all the words. Bring me all the funny chat.
I'm really grateful for you speaking to that, and thanks for giving me a bit of coaching there. And I really appreciate it. A bit of chat on that because it is fascinating how we all get to this milestone, and it's so different for everybody. But we always look at everybody else, like you say, the grass is always greener, right? Always.
Always, 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 always. That's I always say that if I wasn't the turning 30 coach, then really I'm the comparison coach because I think that
Mm,
at this age, people just all of a sudden start to become hyper, hyper, hyper sensitive to what other people are doing. Because at the end of the day, we all until our mid-20s usually have a similar journey. We go to school together, we go to university usually, we kind of
yeah.
go to that on that very typical life path all at the same time. Sometimes people do gap years and go traveling and do more crazy things, but in general, we're all on the same trajectory. And then we get to our mid-20s, and then all of a sudden, some people are settling down and getting married and procreating, and other people are still like doing drugs on their, trip in Australia or whatever. And when we get to 30, we're like, oh my God, we can have a group of friends where one of them is a mum, and we can have the other friend that's still doing crazy stuff. And it's like, it creates this huge opportunity to compare.
Mm.
And often that comparison can be really debilitating, and it can also just really throw up a lot of questions for ourselves. So I work with a lot of women to really address that comparison.
Yeah, makes so much sense. It's interesting that we're chatting after I've been watching that Indian matchmaking program.
Love it.
Honestly, can't get enough of Seema, to be honest. Do
I
you know
know,
what?
she's lovely.
She got an Instagram account, nearly 100,000 followers. Have you seen this?
I know she's definitely like an amazing entrepreneur, like businesswoman. You can just tell that she's just the fact that she's got her own TV show on Netflix. I mean, come on.
Well, she was worth apparently, I mean, this is Google, so we don't really fully trust, but she was worth 5 million before she even did Netflix.
God, because it's very lucrative because in Indian culture, it's just so it's a thing to be match made.
It's fascinating. But the language on that show is fascinating as well. Because I was just thinking last night about how much the women on there versus what the men talk about on there is like the women are like, oh, my family is going to be disappointed or are disappointed that I don't have the children and my sisters have the children. And, there's so much pressure on them and they talk about that pressure, and I just find it really really fascinating to listen to them, and but then also see the women on there that are standing their ground and like, unless this is what I want, then it's not happening, right? It's almost like they're thrown into the dating world and they don't really want to bloody be in it. Like,
Totally. I think that's a lot with different cultures and religions. I'm Jewish, and it's like it's I didn't grow up in a religious community. I didn't have to be match made or anything. Could choose my own partner, but there was this like really intense pressure from the community in general, and also from that family cultural specific dynamic that is like, yes, you must find a specific partner of the same religion, and it has to be by a certain age. Like all of my friends from home got engaged at the age of 26, married at 27, and I'm 35 and single. So it's like I'm an alien to them. And it's very
right.
specific. I think it's really relevant that you brought up Indian matchmaking, because when I watch that TV show, I'm like, they need to do this also for the Jewish community, a TV show on it. Because yeah, like it's crazy to be that person in the community and be different, and to be a woman that's like, oh, actually, you know what, I don't really want to get married at this age. I'm happy to do my own thing. And then it's seen as like you're like a woman scorned, oh my God, like how can you be so different?
Mm.
So yeah, like I definitely resonate with the TV show because of that.
That makes so much sense. And so, this is the perfect lead in for the big question that we're going to discuss today. So, that's what I find really interesting is the scorning of the woman that, oh my gosh, it's gone against what, is deemed as the normal trajectory. So the reason I got in touch with you, Emma, was because you've recently frozen your eggs. And I find this topic something that's not discussed enough. And it is a taboo. And it's like, oh, she's gone to do that, has she? Oh, right. Okay. Right? Is it not the way people approach it?
Oh my God. Yes. I'm so happy you said that. It's so true. It's like the whispering and the have you heard? Have you heard? I think in general, now it's becoming more and more popular
Yeah.
for sure. It's becoming more known. 10 years ago, it would be like, oh my God, have you heard? But funnily enough, I was on the phone to my grandma, who she's very, I don't know how to explain, traditional, let's say,
Okay.
very, very traditional. And she did know from my mum that I was freezing my eggs, and we hadn't had a conversation about it whilst I was doing it. And then I called her after I'd finished the process, and we were chatting, and I said, and she got so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that
Right.
I was talking about it, and her partner was there, her boyfriend was in the room, and she was a bit like, I could see her face on FaceTime, and she was like, oh, no, 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 like, let's not talk about fertility. And I was like laughing to myself, like, I am literally going around talking to everybody about the number of eggs I froze and like the procedure, and people get so uncomfortable and they say, how do they get the eggs out? And I'm like, they suck them out, they vacuum them from your vagina, and people are like, they do not, they do not. And I'm like, yeah, they do.
I love this. Yeah, they people find IVF in general fascinating, right? They just can't. Some people are just because it makes so much sense because those who haven't been through it are like fascinated by the whole process. Like I had IUI for some of my rounds, and they're like, well, "What's that?" And I'm like, "It's well-timed sex." And they're like, "But with a donor sperm?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "What is it, like penis through the wall?" I'm like, "No, they just insert the sperm." Right. Well, how do they do that? It's like the constant questions, isn't it? It's like never ending when you open.
It is still taboo, and people
Yeah.
get uncomfortable talking about things that are personal.
Yeah.
And egg freezing has the additional layer of taboo that not only is it, for IVF, people are obviously like weird about the process and can feel taboo to talk about it. But egg freezing is like even more so if it's for somebody who's
100%.
doing it as a single woman who's chosen an elective procedure to do it, is like, you're doing it, like, what does that mean about you, that you're
Mm,
single and you've not met somebody, so now you're
mm,
choosing to take control of your fertility?
yeah.
That in itself is also taboo.
Oh, 100%. And so this is the question then, Emma. What was it that got this to this point going, okay, well, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna freeze my eggs. Was there something particular? Has that just was there is that something that you're like medically, or was it just actually I just want to go through this process because I feel that that would give me more security? Like what was it that really led you to that journey?
It was a breakup that happened a week before my 33rd birthday. And I've been with my ex for almost 4 years, and I just presumed, and we'd spoken a lot about bringing children into the world. And it was okay, we're going to do this at some point soon.
Mm,
And when I went through the breakup, I started dating again, and I was like, daddy hunting. That really, it was like the first few dates that I went on that summer was completely like, okay, I just need to find somebody who can be a really great dad, and it needs to happen straight away. And it
mm,
really felt that intense pressure that I was putting on myself to meet that person. And it shows up in dating when you're stressed about fertility and you're stressed about meeting somebody in a certain amount of time, which a lot of women, I think, in their mid to late 30s can struggle with. Yeah, it's like a really destructive way to date. So then I can't remember exactly. Oh, I do remember. Sorry. I have a client, one of my coaching clients. I was really coaching her through her egg freezing process. Now, she's a huge advocate for it. She'd been featured in a magazine about it. And I was really helping her to go through her third round. And when she was talking about it and we were having really long sessions about it, I was like, you know what? This actually is something that I want to consider.
mm,
And then about 3 months after that, I decided to do the fertility MOT. So
okay.
that's the point where you go and check and see how fertile you are.
Mm,
And I am such a huge advocate for it. If you are a woman, I'd say 30 plus, I think, before, unless there's a specific medical reason, I don't think you necessarily would need to. But again, if it's really bothering you and sitting on you, like sitting with you, then do it. But if fertility is something that is bothering you and is affecting you in some way with your thoughts, you have the option to go and check if it actually should bother you,
mm.
because all women have different levels of fertility. And I think that we have knowledge is power, and we can basically go and see. And I decided, okay, I want to check. I want to see, is this something that I need to be worried about, or do I have more time?
Mm.
And I went to do the fertility test, and very gratefully, everything was normal for my age, if not better than normal. And I felt really relieved and very grateful. And I sat with the doctors and I heard about the process, and and they agreed along with me that I didn't need to do it right now, but it was something definitely to consider, because if you're going to freeze your eggs at some point, the sooner the better. Your
Mm.
egg quality and quantity does decrease over time. So if you're going to spend money on it, if you're going to invest in it, you may as well just do it now.
Mm.
And that was their general party line in the hospital. But I was like busy swanning off in Costa Rica, remote traveling. I had an amazing winter and was doing my own thing. And I said, I'll deal with it when I get back. So actually, from the time that I went through the breakup and decided that it was something I was ready to take control of, to the time when I actually froze my eggs, was 2 years.
Okay.
And I did start it. I did aim to start it in January of this year. So now we're speaking and it's October 2022. So in January 2022, I was all geared up and ready to go. And then the pandemic had another wave, and it was the Omicron virus. And then basically the hospital were like, you might have to cancel it halfway through. And you have to therefore pump yourself full of drugs. And if you get corona, and everyone had it, it was like those weeks when you like didn't know one person who wasn't testing positive. And I
Mm-hmm.
just was like, no, now it's not the right time. Swanned off again to Mexico and Panama this time. And then when I got back, I was like, okay, now. And then that's why it took me until August to actually go for it and do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Emma, how was the process for you overall? How did you find that process? Because we were speaking before the call that this wasn't something that you were doing in the UK. I think this is something that people need to be really aware of, that this wasn't something that you've done in the UK. Maybe you could speak to perhaps why not the UK, and how the process felt when you were doing this abroad. I think that'd be really
Sure.
useful.
Okay, so in terms of where I did it, and I think that it is important. Firstly, I'm based in Tel Aviv in Israel, so it made sense for me to do it here because this is my hometown and the hospital was near my house, and I didn't, there was part of me at one point that did consider, should I go back and be with my family? My mum can look after me when I'm going through the process, and
Mm.
maybe UK is an option. And then the minute I Googled the prices of it in the UK, I was like, absolutely not,
Mm.
because it's way more expensive in the UK
Mm.
than it is in Israel. And the US is the most expensive. I think that's what I understand from people also who've done it in the US, that's way more expensive. I know people who go from the US to the UK to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I know you mentioned about Greece, and I think in other countries in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe,
Yeah.
are much cheaper. And here in Israel, they're huge on anything to do with procreating. They just love it. Every genetic test is included, is free, like everything. And even though it's still private and you pay for it yourself, it's heavily subsidized in terms of the cost is much lower. So even though it was going to be harder to navigate it in another language, I do speak the language here, but I'm not fluent. It was, for me, it made most sense. And I was really happy with it, with the process, with the way that they dealt with it. The nurses in particular were amazing, felt really supported. And it, in that respect, it was a good decision to do it. So I would recommend to somebody who was considering doing it abroad to check options, but
Mm.
take into account that if you do it abroad, you're going to have to go for the initial consultations and tests and things. Probably you'd have to do that in the same country. There would be a gap that will be period dependent. It will be dependent on your cycle for when to start. And there would be a recovery period. So it's something to consider, that it might be months to live somewhere else if that was something that you were happy to do, if your work would allow that, if it's something that was a possibility for you. And then also consider that if you then were to then eventually defrost those eggs and use them, then you would have to pay for the transfer of them back to your country of origin, or do the IVF process in the specific country.
Mm.
So they're just some things to consider.
Mm.
And the other question you asked me was, how was the process? I mean, I could speak about it for another 10 minutes. Am I talking too much about
I
it?
absolutely adore listening to you, Emma. No, the process, maybe just, yeah, go through the process, because I don't think people are aware of what's entailed, right? Like, okay, so we're going to freeze my eggs. then what? You
Then
know,
what?
like
Yeah,
how does
yeah,
that even look? Maybe just speak to maybe like how long, because we've talked about how long it got you to start, but maybe like how long did it take perhaps for the process for you overall? It's different for so many different people because obviously everyone's cycle is different, and like you said about all the logistics of where you're doing it, but maybe just give people an idea of the kind of time and emotional investment in that, you know.
yeah. Wow, emotional investments. It's a whole other story, but I'll talk more about the practical stuff first, the procedure. So the way that it works is that you do all the fertility MOT and the tests and everything, and then you are starting it. And in terms of the time frame when you want to start it, it will be your choice. Like it depends on the hospital and everything. But for me, it was like once I'd have everything ready to go, you do all the checks and everything, then it was just a matter of coming on your period. So you've got to wait for your next period. And obviously my period was late because my body was like waiting for it to come. And it was funny because I actually froze my eggs at exactly the same time as one of my closest friends in the same hospital. She also lives here. And she was due on her period about 4 days after me. And I was late and she came on 3 days before me. And I was so annoyed. It was like a competition and we were waiting to both come on our periods and every day. And when you're waiting to come on, and I'm sure that you know this, it's like every twinge, every like time you have like an ovary pain, you're like, oh fuck. So that was fun. So then you wait until you get your period and then you call the hospital and then you go the next day. And this is basically what you're doing for the whole run up until the procedure is they're monitoring you every 3 days by doing blood. So they're checking your hormones in your blood and also oh my God, I really don't know the word, an intra-vaginal scan.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's when you have the wand to put up your fanny and they're counting the follicles. So each follicle is an indication of one egg. And what they're trying to see is that you inject yourself with hormones throughout the time. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And then every 3 days, it was maybe every 4 days, it was very dependent. Each time they told me a new time to come in, you then therefore are monitored and checked, and they adjust the hormone prescription depending on how your body is reacting to the drugs. Every single body is different, which is a really funny experiment that me and my friend did it at the same time because we have such different bodies. We reacted completely separate in different ways to the drugs. And it's like every single woman who goes through IVF, who goes through egg freezing, can have a completely different reaction. And we get so caught up in reading online and hearing people on Instagram sharing, you're like, oh my God, that's going to be me. And it's like, no, your body will react in its individual way. And that in terms of emotions was a big thing because I was like super researching everything and speaking to millions of women who had egg freezing before. I was really into doing the research behind it. And my body reacted really differently to then what other people had told me. So if you're into this, and now I'm going to tell you at some point how my body reacted, remember that that was just how my body reacted. It doesn't mean that yours will react the same. So after you get your period and you go to the hospital and they check, you then start injecting drugs in your stomach every day. The first few days you're injecting one drug that is to stimulate FSH, basically is to stimulate your ovaries, your ovaries to produce more eggs. And then I think it was on the 5th or 6th day, they introduce a new drug. So you start injecting twice. It's the same time of day, but two different hormones. The second drug is like what's the word? An anti, like, again, it's basically to stop the ovaries releasing the eggs that are being produced.
Yeah.
And then so you do that up until the point where they think that there are enough eggs to go ahead with the procedure. For every woman, it's different, but it's usually from around day 9 or day 10 up until day 14. I know some people it might take longer. It could take another couple of days. And then on the day that they say, okay, you've got enough eggs here, we're happy to go ahead, you then do a trigger shot, which basically then triggers the eggs to be released from your ovaries into your uterus. And then you have a procedure. Now, the procedure is to vacuum the eggs from you. This is what I realized because I actually started an Instagram account called Emma's Eggs, which I do recommend everyone to go and follow. It has you can see the stories of me doing the injections and talking about each day how I felt. And when you do the anesthesia, it's different in every country. So where I was, it was a general anesthetic, a very, very light one. You're only asleep for like 10 minutes and very quick recovery afterwards in terms of, you feel a bit groggy for an hour, but then you're fine. But some countries do it under a local anesthetic. Some countries do something called a twilight. I think that's what they do in the UK, a twilight anesthetic, which is a different type of, you are asleep, but it's much lighter. So yeah, like definitely don't want to scare anyone by saying you have to go under anesthesia and it's really a big procedure. But where I was, you do have general, and they vacuum them out, and then when you wake up, they tell you how many you've got, and then they go on ice, and they're just chilling in the freezer until I want them.
Amazing. And everyone's different when it comes to how many you get. How many did you get, Emma? That's the question that everyone always asks.
Yeah. Well, it was, I'll talk a little bit about the comparison thing because this links to what we were saying at the start. Doing it with my friend was amazing because we emotionally supported each other the whole way through, and it was very amazing. We did video calls, we're doing the injections and things. It was very good to have someone there, but also then came up the issue of comparison. How many eggs are you going to get? And I really, really don't like not being the best in class. It's like a big personality trait of mine. It was funny because she was 3 days ahead of me, and the nurses were going, "Oh, you're responding so well to the drugs. You're doing so well. You've got loads." And I was going in, and I was like, "I need to also get loads." And the funny thing is that she did not have any side effects. Like she just felt, she felt a little bit bloated, but she was fine carrying on with her normal life. I was wiped. I was in bed. I was canceling coaching calls. I was like, could barely walk. I suffered from really bad nausea. I couldn't eat. Like, I was like the worst of the worst. And then I went in and they were like, okay, you're doing well. You're really good. Also some women don't even get one egg. So there's definitely practicing gratitude here. And I really want to say that for everyone listening who may be triggered now because they don't even get an egg to know the story, is that I'm just hyper competitive and also just a bit of a dick sometimes. And they were like, you've got a good amount of eggs, but like not enough yet. Or they said to me, you're definitely going to have to do a second round.
Right.
And they recommend that for if you want 1 or 2 babies from the eggs, if you're going to freeze them, you should get 20 eggs. And so they were saying to me, you've got 10, they're too small. And then like right before they were like, there's 13 here. They were like, 13 is a good amount. For a woman aged 35, it will be a very good response to the drugs if you're coming out with 10 to 15 eggs. So I was like, hey, this is completely normal, but I'm very small. I've always been the smallest in the class. And they were like, your eggs are really tiny. And I was like, for fuck's sake, like, come on. I was each night rubbing my ovaries and rubbing my stomach and going, come on, eggs, come on, little eggies, grow. I was doing Joe Dispenza, trying to imagine that the eggs were growing. And then I go in, and my friend had her surgery a few days before me, and she got a really nice amount as well. And I go in and I was like, okay, come on. Like, I really hope that all 13 of the eggs are big enough. That's what I was really focusing on. And I'd already decided that if I'd got like 16 or 17 plus, then I wasn't going to do a second round because I'd had such a bad reaction to the hormones. I felt so poorly. And I woke up with one eye, from the procedure, from the anesthesia, and they went, you've got 22 eggs. And I literally was like, what? Couldn't believe as I pulled it out the bag. I was like, oh my God, it works. The meditation stuff works. And then in the end, 3 of the eggs weren't viable. They weren't big enough. So 19 went in the freezer. So I don't have to do a second round. So I was just beyond great, like beyond grateful. But again, to anyone listening, it's really normal to do 2, if not 3 rounds, especially if you're 35 and over. I do have high fertility levels. Again, I've never tried to get pregnant naturally. So you just don't know if your body is going to be able to go get a natural pregnancy. You do not know until you start trying. But it's can vary for each woman. Some women, they wake up and they have 2 eggs, and some women wake up and they have 25. It's just very, very individual.
And I always say to people that I totally understand, when it comes to the follicles, that they need to know how many of those are going to be able to grow on. There has to be that percentage. But there are plenty of people who might have less follicles and have less extracted, and then it's all about the quality. So I think that's what people always think as well when it comes to IVF. Like the more, when you hear of people saying, I've got 5 in the freezer that have got to day 5, when they're fertilized, and everyone goes, but then it all depends on so many other factors that we don't take into consideration. So yeah, I'm really grateful for you speaking to that, Emma. Thanks so much.
It's such a grey area, and this well, I have so much to say about it as well. For people who want to freeze their eggs, it's very different from IVF when you then go and put your egg and mix it with a sperm and make an embryo, because
Yeah,
then you can tell the egg quality. With egg
exactly.
freezing, you can't tell. I
Exactly.
decided not to go down the sperm donor route at this age, at
Yeah.
this time, because I do hope that I won't even need to use my eggs. It was such an insurance policy, but you don't know your egg quality. So those 19 eggs, I don't know, we could defrost them in 5 years' time and none of them are good quality. So it's always important to remain grounded and not get focused
Mm-hmm.
on the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, I have a nice story that the client that I was working with, who did the reason she went down the route of egg freezing was because she did a test and at the age of 31, 32, found out she had really low hormone levels and really
Right.
low egg reserve. And she was devastated because she was like, really want to be a mum. Did
Mm-hmm.
3 rounds of egg freezing to get to the amount of eggs that she wanted,
Mm-hmm.
which was really, really taxing, and got pregnant by mistake at the age of 36 after being told
Right.
she was never going to ever be able to have a baby naturally. So it's just
Right.
such important reminders that these things are also arbitrary, and you just, if the universe wants you to have a child or the universe wants you to bring a person into the world, it's going to happen.
Mm, mm, mm. And that there is something that you said there about the process being like an insurance policy for you. Is that how the process felt overall, do you feel?
Totally. Like I really, really, I believe that I won't need to use my eggs, which I know that sounds ridiculous after I've invested a few £1,000s into the process, but there's something about it that is like, I believe that I won't need to use them. But if we don't know, we can't predict the future, there's very uncertain things that can happen. If I'm just trying to bring a human into the world in 8 years' time and I'm in my early 40s and I can't, great, I have them. I
Mm,
have it to uh, rely on, to fall
mhm,
back on. But I don't think I'm going to use them. And it's a great thing to do to genuinely feel like I have insurance. And I can now go out into the dating world and stop husband hunting, stop daddy hunting, and just
mhm,
know that, I'm taking control of it. And that's why I've become such a big advocate for it, because I think and I see all the time in my Instagram community, with my clients, with friends, that women who are 33 plus panic. And when they panic, they think they have no options and then they settle and
mm,
they try to choose partners for the wrong reasons. And I really want to spread this message far and wide that it's a privilege to be able to afford to freeze your eggs. And it's something that I personally had to save up for, and I'm paying it in payments. And it's not necessarily like, yeah, just one thing I did just for the hell of it.
mhm,
And it's a huge decision emotionally and physically, but it's an option for you. And I think that's what I want the message to be, is that if it's bothering you night and day, think about it.
mm, mm. And since you've been through the process, because this was only recent, wasn't it, Emma, really, in the great scheme of, here as chatting about it. So it's quite a raw process, really, when we're chatting this soon on. But I'm wondering, how has it felt since doing it? Now you're like, there's my bank of eggs. This is the dating world. This is my life. Like, how has it felt? Like, is there any like changes that you felt emotionally since then?
Yeah, so I only did it and I had the procedure in September. So it's like the first
Mm,
week of September. So
yeah.
now we're in October. Honestly, I feel amazing. I'm so happy I
Mm,
did it. Like I feel so grateful. And I feel like it's amazing to know that we have this technology and that we can do these things. It's amazing to just know and appreciate that that exists. And we live in an age where we have access to IVF and egg freezing and all these crazy, wild things we can do now. But there's something really different to knowing it and doing it. And
mhm,
I think that for me, when I didn't realize how much emotional space it was taking in my mind until afterwards. And I know it was grueling in terms of the side effects for me, and I didn't feel good. Very short amount of time. The whole thing of not feeling good was 10 days. But for me, even though I felt not good afterwards, the relief and the just pure relief. That's how I would describe it. And something shifted for me, just a huge energy shift. And in terms of dating, I mean, I haven't dated since because I didn't date when I was doing it, because it was I actually hated men. That was one of my huge side effects, was that I just absolutely hated men. Could not look at a man. The thought of a penis, I was like, oh, honestly, I was like really questioning my sexuality for the week I was on the hormones, because I was like, men are the devil. Um, and since then, I still think that. No, since then, I've been like, yeah, I just don't need to rush now. I just can take my
Mm.
time. And if I meet someone amazing, and if not, all good. Like, it just feels, there's something really secure about it, and a huge shift in energy. I just mentioned before we got on the call, I just was away in Egypt. I went on a week break there around 2 weeks after I finished. And it was just in paradise, just doing nothing, lying on the beach. And I don't think I realized how much I needed it to recover. And then when I came back, I was like, oh, I just feel different.
Mm. I love this, Emma. That's so beautiful. And I think that's so reassuring for people who are listening, who are like, I'm thinking about it, but I'm wondering how I would feel. I'm not saying that everyone's going to feel the same, but it's just to hear that actually you went through it despite having to lie in bed with the bloat, hating men everywhere. You've come out the other side and you're like, I'm so grateful that I got to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and also like short-term pain, long-term gain. I think it's all these things is like, yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't that fun. Injecting yourself with hormones isn't fun. And
Mm,
it's just understanding that you have a purpose and a mission and you're going to do it. Yeah, I don't, when I say, for my personal process that I'm happy I did it and I felt relieved, I don't feel like this is a decision for everyone. I think that, and I even have another client who also did a fertility MOT. She's younger than me, a few years younger, and she did a fertility MOT and it came back fine. And we spoke about it the other day, and I did say to her, you don't have to rush. So anyone listening to this is like, oh, Emma said that it's really great and it's fine and I've got the money and I might as well do it. Don't really think about if it's affecting your everyday life and you get to the point, then I think you'll know that it's a
mm.
decision for you, but it's definitely not something to take lightly.
Mm, mm. And also, like, such a journey to finding the clinic that you feel that's going to support you, and where, and the logistics of all of that, and the time and the space, and giving yourself, like you talked about, that mothering that you gave yourself afterwards, like going and lying on the beach and then having that time. I do think that all those factors are so important to take into account, because you deserve all that love after you've been through a journey like that. So where's that time going to be? Do you know what I mean? Like, all of those factors.
Oh, I love that you said that. I'm sure that you know that from your own journey, but it's so, so true. It's like, actually, when I was going through it, I had to use my own coaching tools on myself. And that's always the hardest, when you're like, oh God, I hate the fact that I have to now, that
Yeah.
I've already got the skills and now I need to be like, now I need to love myself. Oh, how annoying.
Yeah.
But it's really like, it really did help. I honestly thought to myself time and time again, I'm so happy I have these tools. I'm so happy that I could use those mindset shifts and all of the things that I work on with my clients for myself, because it's a testing time. And for sure, you have to live on yourself a little bit harder whenever you go through anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like, oh, I'll nip to this clinic and nip back to work. And, it's like, no, give yourself that time. And where would that time exist for you?
Oh, you have to just be so aware of how your nervous system is feeling. And also, you know, as a single woman freezing her eggs, it's really hard to it. I don't want to do down like comparisons to other people in different positions, but there's something a bit emotionally charged about it, because you're doing it alone most of the time. You are injecting and you don't have anyone there to help you. And it can be really triggering. One incident that happened with me is you have to mix one of the drugs yourself. It like comes in a powder with a syringe. I
Mm-mm.
couldn't mix it. And each one, like each syringe, costs like 50 quid or something.
Mm.
And two of them I dropped or something happened, and
Oh,
I couldn't do it, and I was having, and I'm crying and I'm so stressed and you've not got anyone there,
yeah.
and it's really hard. And not to mention that I'm 35. Most of my friends have 2 3 kids right now, and a lot of my one of my closest friends is pregnant, and she's like 6 months pregnant and complaining to me, and it adds a whole new layer that you're doing it without other people. Does that mean I should be pitying myself? Absolutely not. But there's something about being really there for yourself, knowing that you chose it, and also like you're so strong. And I used to put on Sia Unstoppable in the background every time I had to do my injections, because I was like, come on, you're going to do this and you're a fighter. And then obviously had a really strong support system of friends and reached out to people and made sure to let other people be there for me. So I definitely would say there's almost like a different emotional charge to egg freezing, I think.
Hmm. 100% doing it on your own versus doing it in a partnership is always going to be so challenging. Not being able just to eat, it's almost like that. I can imagine, because I'm like ringing my husband going like, and this has happened, and this has happened, and this has happened. And the trigger shot in your ass. I mean, it's like next level. When I was trying to reach round and he wasn't in Athens with me at the one, I was like, versus doing it right.
I didn't do the trigger shot, was in my stomach. I'm like, what? It was in your ass.
Yeah, in Athens, it was in your ass. And then they were like, and get it in the right place. And I was like, oh, this is
How
so
can you see?
good. So when you're on your own, you don't have that buffer. You don't have that buffer. You don't have that. So I get it.
But I want to say, I want to reframe it for anyone listening that there's something about not having anyone to complain to, which makes the complaints less, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
I just want to say it like that because we can really, grass is greener, idealize that if I
Yeah.
had my partner, I would feel better. But it's like, no, actually, you would probably complain more. Like, you would probably just be like more of a baby. Like, I know for sure that when I was with my ex, I used to like put a lot of shit on him. And now I'm like, hey, sometimes I put my shit on my dog, but like, I definitely don't complain as much. So I think that it's definitely different having somebody there. And yeah, for sure, being able to text them and complain to them and cry to them. But sometimes it's like, it's a good thing not to have somebody there.
I love that, Emma. Thank you so, so much for chatting to us about that. That's honestly, it's such a gift that you're prepared to do that. And I know that you'll be like, of course. But honestly, I've been in the world and seen how much shame and hiding exists in this world. And anyone that's willing to talk openly about it and share their experiences, it's so cathartic for people. So I am honestly so grateful for you today, Emma. Thank you so, so much for chatting to us.
No, so as I was mentioning before, I'm just such an advocate for this topic and for taking control of fertility and knowing your options. So really appreciate being invited on. Thank you.
And where can people find you? I know we mentioned your Instagram, but maybe just like I'm going to pop it in the notes, but just I don't know about you, but when I'm listening, I like to be able just to hear. So if there's anywhere people can go and learn more about working with you, your coaching, that'd be amazing.
So I usually am hanging out mostly on Instagram. So I'd say go and find me there. If you listen to this and you enjoy it or you have any feedback or you even want some specific advice about whether you should freeze your eggs or the process, then please DM me. Feel free to reach out. I'm always available there. My coaching page is Turning 30 Coach, which is 30 is the numbers. And I also have an Instagram account specifically for egg freezing, which I do recommend going to check out my journey. It's at Emma's Eggs. And in terms of where you can find out more about the work I'm doing and what I'm working on, I have my website, which is turning30coach.com. And also, if you want to hear more conversations about being in your 30s and all of the topics surrounding that, such as this and lots of other things, then I have my podcast, which is the Turning 30 podcast.
I love that. Thank you so much, Emma, for being here. I'm so grateful. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you.